Hi Medium, my name is Iqbal Hakim by Shamsudin, and today I'm about to present about an analysis of corporate financial performance, which is a trend and comparative study. In short, cross-sectional analysis. So move on to the next slide, which is about company background of these two companies that have been chosen, which is Westport Standard & Berhad and Petron. First of all, Westport is a local company that had been invented in 1994 but decided to change their name in 1997, and it was a multi-cargo company that served wide variety of services not only toward the Malaysian but also toward the foreigners. So move on to the next slide, which is about Petron history. So Petron have a long story because it started in 1930, where there is two companies that decided to collaboration. After the collaboration, the rest is history. Okay, move on to the next slide, which is a trend analysis and comparison between these two companies. We started our comparison with current ratio. So current ratio have been used in order to determine if either that company are able to pay for their current obligation without having any difficulty. As you can see that the ratio for export is slightly increasing in 2019 but slightly decreasing back in 2020, but it's not a bad thing for the company because the decreasing is not too huge compared to the Petron, where their ratio slightly decreasing from years to year, which is 2018 until 2020. So it shows that veterans are having difficulty in paying for their current obligation from years to years. Next, move on to the next slide, which is quick ratio. Quick ratio is quite familiar and quite similar with the current ratio, but the difference between them is quick ratio have been used in order to determine either that company are able to pay for their current obligation using their most liquid asset. So, as you can see that Westport ratio is quite similar to their current ratio, which is it keep increasing in 2019 but decreasing back in 2020. So it is not a bad thing because the ratio decreasing is not too huge compared to the Petron, where their ratio is slightly decreasing from years to years. So it is clear that Petron are having difficulty in paying for their current obligation using their most liquid asset in 2018 until 2020. Next, move on to the next slide, which is total asset turnover. Total asset turnover have been used in order to determine either that company are using every single fixed asset that they had in order to generate their sales. As you can see that from the graph, Westport are having a huge amount of ratio, but it is good because their ratio slightly increasing from years to years, unlike the Petron that having a huge number of ratio but slightly decreasing from years to years. It shows that Petron are not even fully utilizing their fixed asset in order to generate their sale compared to Westport, even they raise a huge number of ratio. Next, move on to the next slide, which is average collection period. So average collection period and has been used in order to determine the period taken by these two companies in order to collect their debt from their creditors. As you can see that Petron are having positive side in terms of this case because they only took 55 days to collect their debt back from their creditors compared to the Westport because they took 213 days in collecting their debt from their creditors. So it is clear that Westport are having a weak policy compared to Petron that becomes so strict when it comes to collecting their debt from their creditors, where it is good for Petron but it is bad for the Westport. So the net ratio is a debt ratio. So what is debt ratio? Debt ratio have been used in order to determine the number of debt that have to face by these two companies. From the graph, you can see that these two companies are facing positive situation where their ratio keep decreasing from years to year, which is 2018 until 2020. So it is good for these two companies because it will allow them to gain more profit instead of paying for more debt from years to years. Next is the long-term debt ratio. So what is the difference between long-term debt ratio and debt ratio? The difference between them is the period. Long-term debt ratio is more longer compared to debt ratio. As you can see that the situation is slightly different because it's totally different because Westport situation is quite good compared to Petron because their long-term debt ratio decreasing in 2020 while the Petron ratio slightly increasing from years to years. So it shows that the Petron have to face a huge number of debt from 2018 and 2020. In other words, it has become barrier for the patron to gain more profit compared to Westport that are able to gain more profit in 2020 because their long-term debt ratio become increasing in that year. Next, move on to the next ratio, which is gross profit margin. So, gross profit margin ratio have been used in order to determine the efficiency of any of these two companies. So a higher ratio is good because it indicates more efficient for these two companies. As you can see that the Westport and Bad have a higher ratio compared to the Petron. So it's good for the Westport because it shows that they are more efficient in 3 different years compared to the Petron that are not even efficient in these 3 years. Where it is a bad thing for them and they had to do something in order to become like Westport and Bad. Lastly, operating profit margin. Operating profit margin indicates how the company are able to manage every single cost that related to their operation, which is a higher ratio is good because it shows they are more able to manage the cost well. The costs that are not even included in the operating profit margin are tax and interest. So, as you can see from the graph, the Westport are having a higher ratio compared to the Petron. So it shows that the Westport are able to manage every single cost in 3 different years well. So it allowed them to gain more profit compared to Petron in 3 different years. So it is a good thing for the Westport, but it is a bad thing for the Petron. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you, madam.